Yes, Ray J. CCRC are a delaying institute. And on that note, let's bring in Michael Naughton. Here he is. Dr. Michael Naughton. You're also a professor. I always call you professor. Is that inaccurate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a reader, which is, I suppose, akin to an associate professor.
You're a clever man. You're a clever man.
No,
You're an
no.
academic, Michael.
I tell you what I could do, though. I could send you some photographs of some photographs I took in 2015 and 16 of, I live quite near Bristol Airport, and the sky's totally full of these things that we now know to be chemtrails. And for a year back then, I was just totally obsessed with what on earth is all this about?
Right.
And nobody seemed to know back then what they were, but we all kind of know what's going on now, don't we?
Yeah, and it's wonderful. We are living in a new age of transparency, Michael, and I'm loving it. And this week's resignation of Helen Pitcher is just the icing on the cake. And we're only what? We were only like 14 days into the new year when she said it. She, of course, is the chair of the Criminal Cases Review Commission. She's resigned. She told the Lord Chancellor that she feels she was made a scapegoat over the handling of the Andrew Malkinson case. Take it away, Michael. What do you want to say? I knew I had to invite you on.
I may disappoint some of your viewers and listeners because, I mean, I've just finished writing an article this morning. I started doing it the other day and I started looking into this, and I thought to myself, you know, obviously Helen Pitcher had to go. I mean, she's been totally incompetent from the start. But then I started to think about all of the other chairs that I've known, and I've been involved in alleged wrongful convictions now for more than 20 years. And so I've had direct experience and dealings with 3 heads at the CCRC. It's only the first head that I didn't have any dealings with. And none of these heads that I met have given me any confidence whatsoever that I would trust them with a publicly funded body to try to assist innocent people who have been wrongly convicted. And I think when I've met them, I mean, the only way that I can kind of think about it, and I don't want to make a personal attack, but this is just the kind of, when you meet these kind of people who work for these kind of organizations, the common parlance is NPCs. The old-fashioned way that we used to think about these people was that they were just kind of jobs worth, like petty bureaucrats,
right.
who just kind of, they just trot out these rules, and you're saying, you know, I have evidence here that this particular person, say for instance, Clive Freeman, I have evidence here that Clive Freeman is an innocent victim of a wrongful conviction. And then they just say back to you, like an automaton, like they're not a real person. They go, the real possibility test means that you had an opportunity to argue this at your trial. You didn't argue this at your trial, therefore you did not have a fair trial. And you're saying, please stop talking like a Dalek, right? Just listen to what we're saying. As a human being, this is a human being. This is all the evidence that shows that they're innocent, and they've been in prison for 37 years, right? Show some humanity. And they go, I have to stick to the real possibility test, and you can't get past it. And so that's true of every single chair at the CCRC that I've ever met.
Right.
And then I started to think about, they're all like that. That's how you get into those positions. You know that, Sonia. Whether that be your world or my world, whatever world that's in, whichever occupation, whichever profession you're in, the people who end up in those positions are always a certain type of people, right? And they do psychometric testing and they vet people to make sure that they're the sort of people that will actually put the rules of the organization first, even when those rules are clearly stopping innocent people from overturning their wrongful convictions. And you sometimes think to yourself, is it me? Is there something I don't understand here? What's actually going on with these people?
Right.
And they don't have any charisma, they don't have any humanity, and they're in charge of these things.
They're gatekeepers, aren't they? That's what they are.
They are gatekeepers. And the only thing that we can do is get enough support to try to get people in these kind of positions that truly represent our interests. And so this article I've been writing, I ended up saying at the end that as the CCRC is currently constituted, I didn't mention my own name, but for the purpose of this conversation, I could. But I said that if you just change the head of that organization, and you don't change the structures which determine which kind of cases it can refer, and you know, which also determines how those cases are worked on. You could put Emily Bolton in charge of the CCRC. You could put Matt Foote in charge of the CCRC. These are the people who work at the organisation Appeal that actually, you know, did all of the investigation that overturned Andy Malkinson's conviction, which is at the centre of all of this brouhaha.
And just for people who don't know, let's be clear, Andy Malkinson's was an absolute, it was a horror story. I think 17 years inside for a rape he didn't commit. They repeatedly refused to accept new information. And wasn't it a case that it took a grassroots organisation to raise the funds necessary in order to be able to raise awareness to what was going on with Andy Malkinson? That was what turned it, wasn't it? It was a grassroots organisation.
Absolutely. I mean, it's people like the people who are watching this. They donate fivers and tenors to crowdfunding sites. And this actually is the money where we've got a state-sponsored, a state publicly funded body that gets, you know, many millions of pounds a year that isn't doing this work. And so even like the case of Clive Freeman, you know, that work is being done by volunteers with their own money, and the CCRC is not doing what it was set up to do.
Right.
But the problem is that the way the CCRC is constructed with this thing called the real possibility test, it's just wheeled out as a justification time after time after time after time to say that people who are innocent or discredit all of the evidence in their cases, that they're not having their cases referred because they could have done this work at the time of their trial. And so Malkinson was refused twice by the CCRC. And it was the third application by Appeal that also got the media behind it that forced the CCRC to do what it was supposed to do in the first place. But my problem with Helen Pitcher's resignation is that although Mr. Malkinson himself and the organisation Appeal and everybody seems to be celebrating that, you know, that this person has gone, this person who was in charge of the CCRC is no longer there. I started to get my suspicions, and this might actually please you because, you know, we can all say, isn't it wonderful? The next chair is going to be amazing. Well, in my experience, they're not amazing, right? The chair before Helen Pitcher, his previous work had been as CEO of the Crown Prosecution Service. So someone who's embedded with Crown Prosecution culture becomes the head of the CCRC.
That's a conflict. Wait a second.
I wrote about this 15 years ago.
But some people might not realise what this actually means. So obviously the CPS, that it's their job to decide whether people be charged or not. And the CCRC is their job to decide whether it was an unsafe conviction. What a conflict of interest, Michael. My mind is blown.
And it was under his watch that the kind of statistics for rejection went up from 97.5% to 99%. And the first thing that he did was the Criminal Case Review Commission was a response to the wrongful conviction of the Birmingham Six. And rather than locate the building, the home of the CCRC in Petty France in London, where all of these government officers are, they actually put it in Birmingham, symbolically to represent this is what we've done in the name of the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four. And from Alpha Tower, you could see the tavern where the bombs went off. And that was a reminder. And there's a Garden of Remembrance in Birmingham. And you can see that. It was just around the corner from where the CCRC building was. Richard Foster, and this was a real shift towards bureaucracy, right? His first job was to close down the offices in Alpha Tower. He said they were too expensive. And he moved the CCRC into the building where he'd previously worked as CEO of the Crown Prosecution Service. So the CCRC officers were next door to the Crown Prosecution officers.
Oh, no. No.
We had a demonstration outside the CCRC new offices then. And it was really, really funny. But anyway, I digress. But with regard to Helen Pitcher, I think what's going on is we shouldn't celebrate too soon.
Right.
Because what I noticed is,
are we being played?
I think it's understandable that Andy Malkinson, who was twice rejected by the CCRC, is peeved with the CCRC, and he holds the CCRC accountable for him spending longer in prison than he should have spent. And there is no doubt that the CCRC did that. I mean, conservative estimates say that Andy Malkinson could have spent 10 years less in prison had the CCRC done its job properly. But that would have still meant that Andy Malkinson was wrongly convicted, the police and prosecution conspired against him, the jury found him guilty, witnesses got it wrong, the Court of Appeal failed him, and the CCRC failed him the first time when Helen Pitcher didn't work there. It was under Richard Foster. So I think that I think it's wrong if we individualise this.
Right.
All of the ills of our criminal justice system onto the former head of the CCRC. I think what we need to do is we need to think what is being hidden here. And I think what's happening is even the Justice Secretary is jumping on the bandwagon going, I think that if we sack Helen Pitcher, everything else is in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is. I think there's so many problems with all of these miscarriage of justice cases, from how the police investigate alleged crimes, how prosecutors decide not to disclose things, how juries are only fed a partial amount of information and not given all of the information. And all of these things now, they're all being swept under the carpet. And the problem with the Justice Secretary is that she knows that since 2012, I have, in good faith, and many, many other people who are working in the field against wrongful convictions, we've submitted evidence to 5 or 6, I think it's 6, different parliamentary reviews. So the Ministry of Justice triennial review of the CCRC 2012, it pays for the CCRC, so periodically it reviews it. Even it acknowledged that the real possibility assessed was a problem in terms of the CCRC rejecting potentially innocent applicants, and something needed to be done. That led to a parliamentary justice committee. There was a full public inquiry. We gave evidence in the House of Commons. That led to the Westminster Commission on Miscarriage of Justice also making the same observation. And at the moment, the Law Commission for England and Wales is investigating the effect of the real possibility test on meaning innocent people can't overturn their convictions. There's not been one word of the problem of the real possibility test in Malkinson overturning his conviction or in Helen Pitcher resigning. It's like none of this is happening.
This is so curious. So the thing is, she actually did allude to this in her resignation statement. She said that they'll struggle to find a successor, right? Because she's saying basically that she's getting caned for other people's problems and failures. That's what she's saying. But it's like, I wonder, do you just think that she's kind of like her head has been offered up to us, just like you say, in the hope that everything will go in the rear view, just like, Yvette Cooper standing up in Parliament and saying, yeah, we're going to have now local-led inquiries to grooming gangs because of all the big furore about it over the last few weeks. They do that, don't they? To keep the plebs quiet.
Yeah, they kick the can down the road, don't they? And they give lip service to these things. And I think the problem with Helen Pitcher is, and I've seen this with several people who've worked at the CCRC as commissioners and now as a chair, that what seems to happen is that I run something called Empowering the Innocent, and we've got a website called CCRC Watch, as well as other things. But as this conversation relates, it's CCRC Watch. And on the CCRC website, I've always encouraged people, actual alleged victims of wrongful convictions, and family members and supporters, to write open letters to Helen Pitcher, right? And to kind of plead their case as the head of the organisation. And the replies that we've got are there for everybody to see, because for some reason, they tend not to reply to some people, but they do reply to us. And you can see in the attitude that is displayed in the responses that they have a complete moral indifference to what they're being told. People are pleading with them, pleading with her, and to look into these cases as the head of the organisation and to take some responsibility for what's going on. and they don't, because they're NPCs. They just sit there and give that
Yeah.
Dalek Cyberman response.
I mean,
But
it's exactly,
now, hold
yeah.
on, but now
What?
when she's actually resigning, she's now showing that she actually knew all along that there were
Right.
these problems.
That was literally what I took from it. It's like, so you were aware all along what
Right.
you were dealing with. That is literally what I took from it.
And
Right.
so
So move on.
people don't, a lot of people don't like me talking like this, Sonia, because I'm not on a side. I'm on the side of there is no such thing as justice unless you've got truth. And if people are actually trying to play both sides or flip-flopping which side they're on, I'm always going to call that out, because I want people to show integrity. And what we used to have is, before we had the CCRC, a lot of your people who are watching this or listening to it, they'll remember something called rough justice or trial and error, right? So before the CCRC, we had these TV programs that used to do these full investigations into these alleged miscarriages of justice. And they would present these to the government and all the public. They were some of the most watched programs on TV. And they were headed up by a guy called David Jessel. And David Jessel was absolutely unbelievable. When I was a kid, my family, we were glued into these programs. And I've always thought what I do is resurrecting what David Jessel and Rough Justice and Trial and Error did. When the CCRC was set up, David Jessel became a commissioner at the CCRC, right? And he gets this, secure income, hundreds of thousands of pounds, whatever they get. And then a journalist wrote to him, and then this journalist shunted on this, but they sent their email to him and his reply to me. And when he became a commissioner at the CCRC, all of the cases that he'd been working on, he signed the Official Secrets Act that he would not ever do anything which would undermine the reputation of the CCRC. And so when this journalist who worked with him on some of these high-profile cases said, oh, what are we going to do about this case now, David? What are we going to do about this case? He says, I'm having no more involvement in those cases. I work for the CCRC, and it's the real possibility test, and those cases can't be referred back to the Court of Appeal. Now, when he gave up being a commissioner at the CCRC, guess what happened?
Oh, God.
He started criticising the CCRC the possibility test.
Lord.
And everybody fell for it. And people now think that David Jessel is the darling of miscarriages of justice. And the whole thing is a fake. And the things I've turned down, I'm not a man with the most integrity in the world.
Ooh, don't say that about yourself, Michael. I'll have to start drilling down on you.
Well, I don't want to ever be someone to say to me that what you're saying now is a contradiction. And
Right.
you were saying you had a problem with the real possibility test, and all of a sudden you don't. And why is that? Because you've been given £100,000 a year to kind of not criticise it.
I've seen it happen before. I've literally seen campaigners working on behalf of disabled people then offered jobs by the assessors who are assessing disabled people and completely changing their tune. And they pick these people from the field because they are the most perfect, because they kill two birds with one stone. They've brought inside somebody who will continue to gatekeep the operation, but they've also closed down dissent. It works beautifully.
What normally happens is the biggest critic of a failing institution or organisation is often the replacement. So this week, you probably won't be surprised. I'm probably the biggest critic of the CCRC. People have said to me, they're going to ask you to be head of the CCRC. I said, they won't do, because actually I was approached last year, which is probably 8 months ago. I was approached by somebody saying, would I consider to be the next head of the CCRC, which is 8 months before Helen Pitcher has resigned.
They knew.
And I made it clear to them then that the only way that I would be able to consider something like that, I actually said I didn't want it, actually I'm happy as I am, but would be the real possibility test would have to go, and we'd have to be able to send all of the applications of innocent people back to the Court of Appeal, which would be scores and scores and scores of cases, right? Because, I think I said before when I was talking to you on your show that, when I was critical of the CCRC when it was first set up, people said, you've got to give it time. I said, well, the statute shows you it's going to fail innocent applicants. You've got to give it time. You've got to let it have a chance. After 25 years,
Set up to fail.
right, and 98% of people, 97% of people on average, being rejected, the evidence is clear. The CCRC is a body to prevent miscarriage of justice coming to public attention for the damage they cause to trust and confidence in the system. And when the Police Complaints Authority, this is a good thing about getting older. And this is a good thing about having experience of these things, that you remember things, right? That a lot of younger people don't really know about because they're not publicised. But when the Police Complaints Authority was discredited, right, because it was kind of having police officers investigating police officers and finding nothing wrong, right, they put the head of Liberty at the time, John Wadham, in charge of the independent, it was the IPCC, Independent Police Complaints Commission. It was modelled on the CCRC. And then it employed the same kind of people doing the same kind of job. And then it eventually became discredited, right? In the way that you said, the main critic. And then it's now the IOPC. And it will do the same thing and be discredited in the same way. But it'll just keep us quiet for a few years until you've got to give it a chance. And
people have had enough of that. We've seen enough.
We are living our whole lives with new things being set up that are fraudulent, and told to give it another chance.
Yes.
And a lot of us have optimism and we believe what we're told.
Right.
But when you get to the age I am now, right, you've seen it 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times before, and you know that this is not going to be any different.
Right. And that is the reality. Michael, I mean, obviously, I know that you've been absolutely at the forefront campaigning to a degree, obviously, for Clive Freeman, which both you and I believe is an absolute miscarriage of justice. But what other potential miscarriages of justice? Just say that you had taken that role, right?
Well,
what would be straight on your desk?
Well, one of the kind of things is people think that, there's this misnomer. One, that everybody in prison says they're innocent. They don't. I mean, if everybody in prison said they're innocent, nobody would do offending behaviour courses, nobody would make progression, nobody would be released. And it's that myth, right, that actually makes people a bit reluctant to kind of believe people who are saying that they're innocent, such that they don't even want to look into their cases. But if you start to look into cases, and, when I say I'm interested in innocence, there's 2 ways that you can determine whether or not somebody is innocent. One is if you can get DNA evidence like Mr. Malkinson, and you can prove without a shadow of a doubt that the man, it's not his DNA, he's not the person who did the alleged rape, right? The other way is if someone's convicted on evidence which you later discredit and show to be totally worthless, where is the evidence that that person committed that alleged crime? So the presumption of innocence has to be returned to that person, because there is no reliable evidence that the person did what they claim to have done. And if we as a population don't get behind that, this is why we're all being picked off. I know that Sonia did it, I just don't have the evidence.
Right.
So that means that we can arbitrarily just start picking anybody who we think is a troublemaker and just making bogus cases against them.
Right.
I mean, the presumption of innocence is a product of, centuries ago, 800 years ago. It came in because there was to prevent abuses of power from our betters, from people in power. And so what's happened is these discourses have now kind of diminished our confidence in the presumption of innocence, because we keep being told that guilty people keep getting away with it because of the presumption of innocence.
Right.
It's a nonsense when you actually look at the statistics. Because in a magistrate's court, 98% are found guilty, and in a Crown Court, 90% are found guilty. So there aren't all these guilty people getting away with it. And they want us to think that anyone who's acquitted in a criminal trial is a good person getting away with it. So we're doing their work for them.
Yeah, it is. It's like a psychological operation.
And in the article I've just written, I cited different cases which we featured on CCRC Watch over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's Jeremy Bamber, it's Robin Garbutt, it's Clive Freeman, it's John Osborne, it's a guy called Mark Osborne, it's Sean Parker, who you've had on your show, it's Walid Habib, it's John Bartlett, it's Mark Glover. There's lots and lots and lots.
It goes on and on, isn't there? There's so many.
Which I'm saying, these are the causes for concern, that this is an opportunity now that we can actually bring a new head in, get rid of the real possibility test. And these people who've had 3 and 4 and 5 applications rejected by the CCRC, like Mr. Malkinson had 2 rejected before him, these need to be looked at properly to find out whether or not their claims of innocence are truthful or not. It's not enough to simply say, Sonia, you had a fair trial. Yeah.
No.
But I've got evidence here that I'm innocent, or
Right.
I've now, since my conviction, been able to discredit all the evidence against me.
Yeah.
Sonia, you had an opportunity to do that at your trial. You had a fair trial. Well, I don't think I did have a fair trial because none of this went before the jury.
Yeah.
Sonia, we say you had a fair trial and we don't care if you're innocent.
Yeah.
That's not good enough.
Yeah, it's a racket. It's an absolute racket. So any potential hope from this at all, Michael?
Yeah.
Go on.
What we need to do is we need to not get bogged down in this kind of individualization of the Malkinson case. So the Henley report, the Justice Secretary, all the newspapers, all focusing on this one case and this one problem, the CCRC. What we need to do is we need to now do a more systemic analysis of who convicted. Helen Pitcher didn't interview Malkinson in a police station. She didn't prosecute him. She wasn't on the jury that convicted him. She wasn't at the Court of Appeal that rejected his first application. Malkinson is an innocent man. He should never have been charged in the first place, right?
Exactly.
The person who was raped, they said that they dug their nails into their rapist's face and scratched down their face. When they picked Malkinson up the day after, he didn't have a mark on his face. And yet he was still charged and convicted.
Right.
And it took 20 years for DNA to prove the man didn't do it.
Yeah.
So the problem isn't like all of these wrongs can happen and 20 years down the line, we have this system that can try to put these wrongs right.
Yeah.
These wrongs shouldn't be happening in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It needs a seismic change, a whole systemic change. That's exactly what needs to take place. Michael, as ever, really appreciate all the work that you do. Keep holding the flag because, you know, I do believe that one day it will all pay off. I know it's hard. It's absolute hard. It's a slog.
Listen, we've got to be optimistic. We're at a time now, as you said at the beginning, where, you know, because I'm just talking quite narrowly about wrongful convictions in the CCRC, but whichever public body you're looking at, they all work the same way.
They do.
So there's more and more people now who are daring to challenge. There's more and more people becoming more and more aware. And together we're stronger. So we just have to believe and just keep doing what we're doing as much as we can.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Michael Naughton. Brilliant, Michael. Take good care of yourself. Have a wonderful weekend. You are a star.
You are a star. Bye-bye.
You're a star. We're all stars. We're all stars. Take good care of yourself. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. Brilliant work. See, that is God's work. Right there. That's God's work. That's what I think.
It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.